This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news recorded at 13:15 GMT on Tuesday the 23rd of May. I'm Jackie Leonard with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, reaction to the suicide attack in the English city of Manchester. At least 22 people were killed at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. The British Prime Minister has condemned those who carried out the bombing.
This attack stands out for its appalling, sickening cowardice, deliberately targeting innocent, defenceless children and young people who should have been enjoying one of the most memorable nights of their lives.
Around 60 others have been injured. There's also been condemnation from world leaders, including Donald Trump.
So many young, beautiful, innocent people living and enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers in life.
The concert was attended by many children. Some families are still searching for their loved ones. We'll hear about the mood in Manchester city centre following the bombing.
Manchester is coming to terms with it. It's going about its business, but it feels like something of a great enormity has happened.
And how far were the UK's security services expecting this kind of attack? We'll hear from our security correspondent.
What surprised officials and worried them, frankly, is the fact that this involved explosives and a suicide bomber, which we haven't seen in the UK for 12 years, really, since July 2005.
But first, as we reported in our last podcast, the English city of Manchester is reeling from a suicide bombing. The target was an arena packed with thousands of excited fans, including many children, thrilled to be watching their idol, the American singer Ariana Grande. But just minutes after the final song ended, they were caught up in one of the worst terror attacks to hit Britain. As we record this podcast, 22 people are known to have died in the attack, with children among the dead. The youngest victim to have been identified was just 8 years old. 59 other people were wounded and are being treated at hospitals across Manchester. 16-year-old Joseph Harris was at the concert, and he told the BBC of the panic and chaos inside the arena.
When the bomb went off, it was just a panic in the entire room. People would panic, and when you got a lot of preteen boys and girls who, it's a lot of Ariana's demographic, and when they're all panicking and trying to get out, there's going to be mass hysteria. People are going to try and push past each other, and people are going to get hurt. Ourselves actually got stuck in a huge line of people who just stopped completely because they didn't know the situation. So we had to climb over chairs, we had to climb over fences and gates that had been locked to try and get out of doors of the arena itself, which we did in the end luckily get to do, but at the same time it was still terrifying and personally a horrendous end to a perfect night.
Many people in the arena rushed to help others and give first aid to the injured. Phil Dick was at the concert with his family and helped a young girl who had been wounded.
She looked very severely injured. She was very traumatised, blood bubbling out of her mouth and her nose, and she was choking on it. And my wife, bless her, no thought for anything else. She just grabbed that young girl under her arms and dragged her out of the foyer doors onto the start of the concourse, and then she supported her, held her up so that she was no longer choking on her blood, and then we started doing some first aid to compress some of the injuries. Unfortunately, her hair was all singed. She had a plastic bag melted into her hair. It was just horrible.
Desperate families spent hours trying to trace their children. Some are still reported missing. The Greater Manchester Police held a news conference a few hours after the attack had taken place. The force's chief constable is Ian Hopkins.
We have been treating this as a terrorist incident, and we believe at this stage the attack last night was conducted by one man. The priority is to establish whether he was acting alone or as part of a network. The attacker, I can confirm, died at the arena. We believe the attacker was carrying an improvised explosive device which he detonated, causing this atrocity.
Community leaders have praised the way that people in Manchester helped those caught up in the incident, offering beds for the night and driving others home. The Bishop of Manchester, David Walker, said everyone had to get on with their lives without fear.
Manchester's a wonderfully diverse city. That's one of the things I really love about it. And we can pull together. We pulled together in the past. We had a terrorist bomb 21 years ago, so we're not unused to these events. But it is a time for obviously all of us to pray for the wounded, for the dead, for their families, but to commit ourselves to defeat this terrorism as we've defeated terrorism in the past.
British security services have said they believe they know the identity of the lone suicide bomber. And this morning, police arrested a 23-year-old man in Manchester in connection with the attack. In London this morning, at number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister Theresa May gave her first statement about last night's bombing.
It is now beyond doubt that the people of Manchester and of this country have fallen victim to a callous terrorist attack. An attack that targeted some of the youngest people in our society with cold calculation. This was among the worst terrorist incidents we have ever experienced in the United Kingdom. And although it is not the first time Manchester has suffered in this way, it is the worst attack the city has experienced and the worst ever to hit the north of England. The police and security services are working at speed to establish the complete picture, but I want to tell you what I can at this stage. At 10:33 last night, the police were called to reports of an explosion at Manchester Arena in Manchester city centre near Victoria train station. We now know that a single terrorist detonated his improvised explosive device near one of the exits of the venue, deliberately choosing the time and place to cause maximum carnage and to kill and injure indiscriminately. The explosion coincided with the conclusion of a pop concert, which was attended by many young families and groups of children. All acts of terrorism are cowardly attacks on innocent people, but this attack stands out for its appalling, sickening cowardice, deliberately targeting innocent, defenceless children and young people who should have been enjoying one of the most memorable nights of their lives. As things stand, I can tell you that, in addition to the attacker, 22 people have died and 59 people have been injured. Those who were injured are being treated in 8 different hospitals across Greater Manchester. Many are being treated for life-threatening conditions. And we know that among those killed and injured were many children and young people. We struggle to comprehend the warped and twisted mind that sees a room packed with young children not as a scene to cherish, but as an opportunity for carnage. But we can continue to resolve to thwart such attacks in future, to take on and defeat the ideology that often fuels this violence, and if there turn out to be others responsible for this attack, to seek them out and bring them to justice.
The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, described the bombing as an atrocious act of violence.
There can be nothing worse than losing a child in a situation like this. We have to put our arms around them and support them, not just today, but in all the very difficult days to come, because trauma like this doesn't go in a day or two. It's there with them for the rest of their lives. We have to give them all the support we possibly can, and also make sure we live in a safe environment in the future, and we live in safety together. But we do not allow our communities to be divided by this kind of appalling, atrocious act of violence.
Queen Elizabeth called the attack an act of barbarity. And what of the mood in Manchester itself? Our correspondent Rob Watson is in the city centre, and a short time ago he spoke to Jonathan Marcus.
I'm standing just a short distance away from where the attack happened at the arena, which is next door to one of Manchester's main train stations. It's right in the centre of town, so an area that would normally be buzzing with traffic and really just a hive of activity. Everyone's having to walk around. And as for the people, well, I've been walking around this area, around the cordon around where the attack happened. And it's certainly true that the people of Manchester are going about their business. People have been going to work. People have been going into shops, doing the things that they normally do. But you can tell you can tell that this is a very, very different atmosphere. I've heard people talking in the streets about what happened. I've been into several shops and coffee shops. In particular, I've been struck by some of the young people that I've met in Manchester who are thinking to themselves, crikey, that could have been me. So Manchester is coming to terms with it. It's going about its business, but it feels like something of a great enormity has happened here, Jonathan.
And also news that there's been an early arrest today.
Yes, we don't know much about it. A 23-year-old man in the south of Manchester. We were listening to that little clip of Theresa May mentioning that the security forces think that they know the identity of the person who carried out this suicide attack, which would therefore make you think perhaps the security forces have been able to follow up with this arrest and no doubt other parts of their investigation. Something else that's just happened very shortly, I'm not sure if you've been saying this, Jonathan, is that the so-called Islamic State are claiming responsibility for the attack.
That was Rob Watson speaking from the centre of Manchester. So how will this terrible event affect the British general election campaign, which is now underway? Polling day is less than 3 weeks away. Jonathan Marcus heard from our reporter Naomi Grimley.
Well, they've pressed pause on it, and obviously it's inconceivable that in the next 24 hours they will be doing any campaigning at all. Theresa May herself is on her way to Manchester, where she will meet emergency workers and also the newly elected Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. But they will face a choice because obviously this is what the extremists want. They want to disrupt the democratic process, and it probably isn't any coincidence that the attacker chose now to detonate that bomb.
How long do you think the election campaign will actually be suspended for?
It's difficult to know. We did have a similar situation a year ago during the referendum campaign when a Labour MP was assassinated by a far-right extremist. In that case, the referendum campaign was put on pause for 3 days. But obviously with a general election, it is difficult to know because of that jarring sense of how can they possibly go out there and campaign about healthcare funding or the deficit when these families are worried and grieving.
And as you said, this was a campaign that was dominated by the deficit, the health service, Brexit, of course, looming over everything. Is this event, this tragedy in Manchester, going to mean that security rises up the political agenda?
I think it will inevitably mean that. I think we will see many of the old debates about how you deal, particularly with suspects perhaps returning from Syria. There are supposed to be around 400 of the fighters that have gone off to fight in Syria. How do you deal with them? Do you have a tougher system of house arrest for those that you think might carry out something like this? Also, a question for Jeremy Corbyn, the main opposition leader, will be about shooting to kill terrorists. He's been asked about that before and got himself twisted in many senses over that. So I think it is inevitable now that security will move centre stage.
You say there a question of, resources given to security and so on. Do you think there's a public understanding, though, of the threat, of the nature of the challenge that the security forces are facing?
Well, to be fair to both politicians and the security services, they have said all along that they cannot stop every attack. And they regularly say in interviews with the media that there are around 2,000 individuals who they need to keep an eye on. And they have warned that that is not always possible. But I think you're right. There'll be more questions now about whether resourcing of the security services is quite what it should be. And of course, that was not really hitherto a big theme of this campaign.
That was Naomi Grimley. Across the world, there's been horrified reaction to the Manchester bombing. France said that the attack was the most cowardly terrorism aimed specifically and knowingly at young people. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel said it was incomprehensible that someone could use a joyful pop concert to kill so many. Speaking in Brussels, the European Union Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said the people of Europe would not be intimidated into changing their way of life.
The victims seem to be very young people. It is clearly an attack to the European youth and their love for life, I would say so. And I believe young Europeans will continue to value their way of life, their freedom, their joy, their living together, their enjoying together. And I believe fear will not prevail, and the best response to terrorist attacks will continue to be our European youth continuing to live together, enjoy life together, and react in this way.
President Trump has been holding talks with the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, and he had this to say about the Manchester bombing.
As President of the United States, on behalf of the people of the United States, I would like to begin by offering my prayers to the people of Manchester in the United Kingdom. I extend my deepest condolences to those so terribly injured in this terrorist attack, and to the many killed and the families, so many families, of the victims. We stand in absolute solidarity with the people of the United Kingdom. So many young, beautiful, innocent people living and enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers in life. I won't call them monsters because they would like that term. They would think that's a great name. I will call them from now on losers because that's what they are. They're losers.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the attack and urged people to come together to defeat terror.
The slaughter of innocents must be unconditionally condemned and unflinchingly confronted, no matter where it occurs, in Manchester, San Bernardino, or Jerusalem. Terror is terror is terror.
You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. And a reminder that every weekend you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in the world this week. The programme's also available to download from our website. Now, a quick look at some of the other main news stories of the day. President Donald Trump has declared he's committed to helping Israelis and Palestinians try to reach a peace agreement. In an address at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem, Mr. Trump said he was confident that both sides were ready to reach a deal.
I had a meeting this morning with President Abbas and can tell you that the Palestinians are ready to reach for peace. I know you've heard it before. I am telling you, that's what I do. They are ready to reach for peace. And my meeting with my very good friend, Benjamin, I can tell you also that he is reaching for peace. He wants peace. He loves people. He especially loves the Israeli people. Benjamin Netanyahu wants peace.
And Mr. Netanyahu responded by praising Mr. Trump for including Israel in his Middle East trip.
You're the first president in office to visit the Western Wall. We were so deeply moved to see that picture of you touching the stones of the wall. And may I say, we were deeply moved to see First Lady Melania Trump touching the stone on that wall. And equally moved when we saw your daughter Ivanka and your son-in-law Jared do the same. Now you touch other stones. You honor today the memory of 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust.
Benjamin Netanyahu. The price of crude oil has fallen following news that President Trump's administration is proposing to sell half of America's official reserves. Andrew Walker has more details.
The United States has kept an emergency stock of crude oil ever since the energy crisis of the mid-1970s. It's currently equivalent to about 5 weeks of US needs. President Trump's budget plan, which will be more fully revealed in a few hours' time, envisages selling half of it, starting in the next financial year. Although it's only a proposal at this stage, the prospect of more oil coming onto the market has already pushed prices down. Later this week, the oil exporters group OPEC, which does not include the US, will meet to discuss efforts to push prices in the opposite direction.
Andrew Walker. In Seoul, the ousted president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, has gone on trial over a sprawling corruption scandal. She's been charged with extortion, bribery and abuse of power and could be imprisoned for life if convicted. She appeared in court near her former friend, Choi Soon-sil, with whom she is accused of colluding to extort money from companies. Our correspondent Steve Evans reports.
At the start of the trial, the former president was asked what her occupation was. She replied, unemployed. Park Geun-hye and her former close friend did not greet each other with either a word or even a glance. They sit in court 417, stony faces forward, separated by a lawyer. The former president wore a plain black dress rather than the prison garb she's worn since her arrest in March. On her chest, worn like a brooch, a badge with the number 503, her prison number. She had a special hair clip provided by the prison because her normal hairpins were taken away as potentially dangerous. She is a long way from the presidential palace.
Stephen Evans reporting from Seoul. In Indonesia, 2 men have been caned 85 times in the province of Aceh after being caught having sex. It's the first time gay men have been punished under Sharia laws that came into effect 2 years ago. Our correspondent Rebecca Henschke is in Aceh, and she told us about the background to this caning.
Well, the 2 men were found in a rented room together. They're young men in their 20s, and the neighborhood vigilantes broke into their room and found them naked in a very intimate position. They filmed that raid, and it spread on social media, and the men were then found guilty, largely based on the video from that raid, of gay sex under new Sharia bylaws that came in 2 years ago that outlaw gay sex here in Aceh.
What's the response been to that punishment? I mean, has it caused shock in some circles, or are many people thinking that perhaps, they actually deserved it?
Well, where I am, the majority would say they deserve it. In this conservative province of Indonesia, that's the only province that does outlaw homosexuality. Today, there were hundreds of people at the public caning. They were cheering, booing. Some were yelling for the men to be hit harder. Others were yelling, saying that they hoped that it served them a lesson. In other quarters, particularly more in the other islands of Indonesia, we've seen outrage from gay rights groups, also human rights groups, who describe the way they have been treated as a form of torture.
Rebecca Henschke speaking from the Indonesian province of Aceh. Now, just before we came into the studio, it was announced that the actor Roger Moore has died. He was 89 and had been suffering from cancer. He was a highly successful television star before he became even better known through playing James Bond in 7 of the blockbuster films, and he went on to be knighted in the Queen's Birthday Honours of 2003. David Silito looks back at his life.
Handsome, debonair, Roger Moore seemed the perfect replacement for Sean Connery as James Bond. However, he loathed guns and explosions, and he felt 007 was in many ways ridiculous. Forget the Walter PPK. His favourite weapon was wit.
It's the time before we leave for lesson number 3.
Absolutely. There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
That voice, the urbane manner, all suggested a privileged background, but it was a persona he had largely created for himself and played all his life. Born in Stockwell in South London, the son of a policeman, his dad helped him get his first work as an extra after meeting a film director who had been robbed. A spell at RADA followed, during which the 17-year-old Roger Moore married a fellow student. On his return from national service, he had more success as a model than an actor, but he did attract the attention of an MGM scout. He set off for America with a singer, Dorothy Squires, 12 years his senior, who was to become his second wife.
How much do I love you?
His Broadway debut opened and closed on the same day. He landed a part in The Last Time I Saw Paris with Elizabeth Taylor and also starred alongside Lana Turner. But on television, he really made his mark, beginning with a role in Armour. And later, another series opened more doors.
And you, monsieur, are the famous Simon Templar.
The Saint led to him appearing on the shortlist for a movie, Dr. No, but it wasn't to be. Sean Connery landed the part as Bond. Instead, Moore moved on to The Persuaders, in which he starred with Tony Curtis. A success in Britain, but it failed in America. However, he had a second chance. Sean Connery had tired of playing James Bond.
Mr. Bond. James Bond.
The one thing I was a little nervous about was saying, my name's Bond, James Bond. Because I kept hearing him, my name is Bond, James Bond. And I thought I had to say it Scottish.
Roger Moore was a hit at the box office. His 7 Bond films grossed around $1 billion.
007, XXX. Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Oh, we played it tongue-in-cheek. As I play most heroes tongue-in-cheek, because I really don't see myself as a hero. Although I play them as though, it's all a joke.
Roger Moore starred in other films, including Shout at the Devil and The Wild Geese, but when the 58-year-old realised the Bond girls were younger than his daughter, he hung up his dinner jacket. After that, he parted from his third wife of 35 years and married again. But his life found new meaning after Audrey Hepburn encouraged him to become a roving ambassador for UNICEF. It led to both a CBE and later a knighthood. He may have been famous for spraying bullets and one-liners, but he grew to loathe violence in the movies. The real Roger Moore was perhaps happier in his UNICEF role than he'd ever been as a ruthless secret agent with a licence to kill.
David Sillito with that look back at the life and career of the British actor Sir Roger Moore. Now back to our main story, the suicide bombing at a concert venue in the English city of Manchester. The British Domestic Intelligence Agency, MI5, has condemned the attack. Its Director General Andrew Parker said in a statement online, "We remain relentlessly focused in numerous current operations on doing all we can to combat the scourge of terrorism and keep the country safe." So how does this attack compare to previous terror incidents in the UK? Here's our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
It is noticeably different from what I think the authorities were expecting. I mean, talking to counter-terrorist officials in the last few weeks, you sense that they felt that something was almost certainly going to happen. We had an incident in March in Westminster where an attacker used a vehicle and knives to attack people. And I think that was the expectation of what kind of attack might take place in the UK. Something with vehicles, something with knives, something relatively low tech. And so I think what surprised officials and worried them, frankly, is the fact that this involved explosives and a suicide bomber, which we haven't seen in the UK for 12 years, really, since July 2005, because that's the kind of attack the security services have on the whole been much more effective at stopping, because it does require a degree of organisation and time and planning and preparation to put together some kind of device like that.
Now, that's an interesting point, because there's been a lot of comment about so-called lone wolves, individuals who might suddenly wake up one morning having been radicalised and get in their car and perpetrate some act like running people down. But this attack to assemble a bomb, to presumably reconnoitre the potential target, that implies a much broader operation, perhaps other individuals involved as well.
I think you're right that it implies a broader operation in terms of time, in terms of logistics, in terms of getting hold of the chemicals for a device. I think the crucial question at the moment for investigators is whether it means other people were involved. We're still not clear on that. I mean, it is possible that one individual could have somehow got hold of instructions for making the device, got hold of the chemicals, worked out how to do it himself and been able to carry it out. That's possible. But it is also possible that someone else might have worked with him, might have built the device, and that would clearly worry authorities, because it would mean that there is still a serious threat still out there.
Now, I spoke to our colleague Naomi Grimley earlier on about the implications for the agenda of this election campaign. Security hasn't figured very prominently. Do you think this is not only going to bring it back up to the top of the list, but also to raise more questions about whether sufficient resources are being devoted to security in Britain?
I think it may do. Once campaigning resumes, at some point you expect it will in the coming days. I think the issue isn't necessarily new laws, but as you said, more resources, whether particularly the police have enough resources to be able to cope with a threat which is pretty intense at the moment. I mean, they talk about having around 500 live investigations relating to counter-terrorism and on average an arrest a day related to terrorist activity. So the tempo is pretty high for the police and security services. So I think that's the one issue where it may come up, is that of resources to deal with that.
That was Gordon Carrera, the BBC security correspondent. And we'll end this edition of the Global News podcast with some of the voices from Manchester after a pop concert became the scene of mass murder.
Fire just went up in the air and we felt that he smacked us in the face.
Which way? Come on. We need to get round. Come on, we get round this way. Come on.
And then suddenly a massive flash, a bang, smoke. I felt a bit of pain in my foot and my leg, and my wife, I had to lay her down on the floor. She's got a stomach wound and possibly a broken leg.
Bodies everywhere. It was bad, like kids and that, teenagers and that, just lying there screaming.
Yeah, very shaken. I think it's just the reality of how close it came.
Some voices from Manchester. And that's it from us for now. I'll be back with an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you'd like to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, do please send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jackie Leonard. Until next time, goodbye.